Hello, hello. Tara here. Chapter 4 of Julie Klassen's The Bridge to Belle Island. Chapter 4. That afternoon, Benjamin found himself bounced, jostled, and thoroughly shaken on the Emerald, a day coach traveling westward from London. The journey into Berkshire was only some 30 miles, but it felt interminable. Ben worried he would become ill or, heaven forbid, have one of his episodes. Across from him in the coach sat a stoic old cleric and a severe-looking woman in black, and beside him a young gentleman with a countenance almost as green as his natty frock-coat confessed deep regret about an overindulgence of port the night before. Suddenly the gentleman's cheeks bulged, and he retched, not quite making it out the window. The sound and smell nearly overcame Benjamin's restraint. Embarrassed, the young man apologized to the other passengers. Benjamin opened the window on his side, just in case, then handed the gentleman his handkerchief with an empathetic grin. Ben closed his eyes, drawing in deep breaths of fresh air, trying to stave off his own nausea. Again and again he inhaled deeply and exhaled with a long whew. The spell began to pass. He hoped the worst was over, for he wanted to perform this assignment well and make Mr. Hardy proud. To do so, he needed to arrive on Belle Island looking the picture of a competent, composed lawyer. If he concentrated, he could still feel Mr. Hardy's comforting hand resting upon his shoulder after his failure. It was the closest thing to fatherly affection Benjamin had experienced in years. He supposed he should have been the one offering comfort, since Robert Hardy had lost not only a partner in the law firm, but also an old friend. "You can do this," Benjamin admonished himself. "For his sake you must." The road the Emerald traveled parallel to the River Thames for The road the Emerald traveled paralleled the River Thames for a time. Ben stared out at the sun-dappled water, noting the boats and occasional fishermen, and his mind traveled back to a few summers from his childhood when his father had actually closed his practice for several days and taken them to a fishing lodge. Benjamin and his brother had spent many sanguine hours along the picturesque shore, racing rowboats, learning how to fish, and gathering firewood while his surgeon father expertly filleted their catches and mamma cooked them, all of them talking and laughing together as a family. A happy family. How long ago it seemed. Finally reaching Maidenhead's Bear Inn, Benjamin hired a driver, a young man with a small gig pulled by a single horse, to take him the rest of the way. The rickety vehicle listed to one side and possessed not a single spring or ounce of comfort. After 15 bone-jarring minutes, they reached the outskirts of Riverton. The little hamlet curved around the river bank, its church, homes, and shops situated on a low rise, and at present enveloped in fog. The driver pointed to a wooden bridge spanning the river, just wide enough to allow a carriage to pass. "That takes you to the island, sir," the young man said. "The Wilders have lived there for ages. You'll see the house better once the fog burns off. All right if I set you down here?" Yes, all right." Benjamin paid the man, climbed down on rubbery legs, and turned to study the scene. He faintly heard the driver's "Walk on," and the gig continued on its way, but his gaze remained fixed on the opposite shore. Through the filmy gray fog he made out a tall stone manor house shrouded in climbing vines and mist. Nearer shore, trees overhung the river, prickly junipers and chestnuts, weeping willows and elms, their hoary heads bowed in grief, their arms reaching out, pushing him back, warning him away. Benjamin frowned. What a foolish notion. The journey had clearly addled his brains. As he stood staring across the bridge, it seemed to undulate, the rails to compress to a narrow tunnel and then widen again. He grasped a post for support. Good heavens! No wonder he rarely traveled. Movement caught his eye. Across the bridge, a figure appeared through the mist. A woman in a long red coat, her deep bonnet concealing her face. She stood out against the gray background like a rose finch in winter. Benjamin blinked and looked again, and the woman was gone, disappeared into the fog. Or had it been an apparition? He shivered. Stepping onto the bridge, he felt it tremble beneath his feet. For a moment he stopped where he was, everything in him longing to be back in his shabby, comfortable rooms in London. Something told him if he crossed the bridge, his life would never be the same again. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and prayed for wisdom and direction. He again reminded himself of his purpose in coming. He was there on behalf of the firm, to offer legal advice to Miss Wilder after Percival Norris's death, and to discreetly discover if she or a member of her family was to blame for it. His success would go a long way toward redeeming his recent mistakes. Soon he felt a bit steadier. When he opened his eyes again, the fog was beginning to lift. He wondered about the female figure he'd glimpsed, or imagined. Had it been Isabel Wilder? He had not seen the woman's face. He wondered how old Miss Lawrence's maiden aunt would be. 40? 45? For some reason he imagined an angry spinster with a hook nose and an evil glint in her eye. Through the lingering mist, a few more details of the island began to emerge. Beyond the bridge, a lawn led up to a broad veranda that wrapped around the front and side of the stone manor house. Columns flanked its entryway, and a 3-story bay projected on the right. His gaze traveled up to a high rooftop parapet, and an unpleasant jolt of nerves shot through him. Not fond of heights, he quickly looked away and walked on. As he stepped from the bridge onto the island, a woman near his own age appeared from behind the house, a shaggy dog trailing slowly behind. The woman was tall and slender. Light brown hair with streaks of gold shone from beneath her dark red bonnet. Now that he could see her face, he realized she was far too young and attractive to be the spinster he'd imagined. A companion, perhaps? She noticed him and stopped. "Oh, good day." He took a deep breath and began. "I am here to see Miss Wilder." The woman replied, "I am she." Incredulity flared. Her face was oval and smooth, her eyes large and blue, though dark circles shadowed them at present, like faint crescent bruises. She seemed a pretty, pleasant young woman, not evil-looking at all, though he knew too well that looks were often deceiving. "You are Isabel Wilder?" "Guilty." Interesting word choice, Benjamin thought. A wave of dizziness washed over him, but he tried to ignore it. She looked down. "I'm sorry. You've caught me." "Caught you?" he echoed stupidly. Was she going to confess on the spot? "Just coming down for the day. I usually rise early, but I was not quite the thing this morning." The dog lay at her feet, tongue lolling, as if as weary as she. "Oh, he stammered lamely. "I have just arrived myself." "Late start for you as well? I believe Mr. Linton expected you a few hours ago." "Expected me?" "Yes. Aren't you the master weaver here to teach lessons?" "I am not." "Oh, sorry. Then who are you?" He set down his valise and gave her his card, hoping she did not notice the slight tremor of his hand. "Benjamin Booker, with Norris, Hardy, and Hunt." She glanced at it. "Uncle Percy's firm, of course." She started up the veranda steps and gestured for him to follow. "Oddly enough, I was just thinking about Percival. In fact, I dreamt about him last night." "You did?" "Uh-huh," she replied casually. "Not surprising, I suppose. He was just here a few weeks ago."
"So I heard."
As they crossed the veranda, she asked, "What brings you here? I suppose you brought something I need to sign?" Benjamin hesitated. He recalled Mr. Hardy's advice to more than one young barrister. "State what you suspect as fact with confidence, and 9 times out of 10 people will believe you in possession of the evidence and respond accordingly." With this in mind, he said, "The two of you had quite a row, I understand, and afterward you sent him a rather unpleasant letter." She grimaced. "Yes, I suppose he told you all about it." Benjamin sketched a non-committal shrug. She sighed. "I was angry. He is insisting we lease part of the island to a stranger. It will spoil everything I have tried to do here." "Well, with him dead, there's that problem sorted." Her head whipped toward him, mouth parted, face elongated in shock or a convincing imitation. "What? Percival is dead?" He nodded, the dizziness mounting. "No, no, not now. Hold yourself together, Booker." Taking a deep breath, he asked, Where were you last night?" "Here on the island."
"Can anyone vouch for that?"
Yes?" Suddenly unsteady, Ben teetered and grasped a nearby column for support. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Are you all right?" He shook his head, the act making him woozier yet. Heaven help him, he was going to faint. Not in front of this woman of all people. "Are you unwell, Mr. Booker? Truly, you look very ill." He pressed his other hand over his eyes.
"Just dizzy. It will pass."
"Do sit down before you fall down." She took his arm and guided him to a nearby chair, her grip surprisingly strong.
"Strong enough to kill a man?"
Isabel studied the man seated on the chair, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, and felt a water and oil slurry of pity and fear wash over her. Why fear? She asked herself. She had nothing to be afraid of. It was only the remnants of that horrible nightmare clinging to her and making her uneasy.
"I suppose I am the only one to feel the earth spinning," he murmured. "The ground is not actually quaking."
"No, it isn't," she gently replied. She sat down on the veranda sofa near him, clasping her hands and looking about her, unsure what to do. How strange that she had dreamt of Uncle Percy only last night. A violent dream at that. She murmured, "I can't believe Percival is dead."
"Yes, he was killed."
She reared her head back, stunned anew. "Killed? Are you sure?" He nodded, and a low groan escaped him. He extracted a handkerchief from his valise and mopped his brow. "How?" He sent her a pained glance.
"Perhaps you could tell me."
She sucked in a breath. "What is that supposed to mean?"
He grimaced. "Not certain yet. Awaiting coroner's report."
Isabel slowly shook her head, stomach knotted. A killer in their townhouse? Her chest tightened at the thought. "And my niece, Rose Lawrence. Did you see her? Is she well?" "Yes, perfectly." She exhaled a long breath. "Good." Movement catching her eye, she looked and saw a man's high-crowned hat beyond the veranda railing. "Teddy!" Isabel waved her friend over, remembering Carlotta mentioning the doctor had gone to call on her tenants, the Houghtons and Abel Curtis. Curtis. The name delivered a prick to her heart, but not the lance it once had. Abel was their groundsman, and the father of the young man she'd once fancied herself in love with, the one who'd dropped her in the dream. Dr. Theodore Grant mounted the stairs and crossed the veranda with his long-legged stride, auburn hair and side whiskers showing beneath his hat, green eyes narrowed on the man seated near her. Teddy was almost 2 years older than she was, but his face retained a boyish appearance. He and Evan had both grown up with her on the island.
What is it, Isabel? What's wrong?
Mr. Booker seems to be having a dizzy spell. At his raised brow glance, she explained, He is visiting from London, a lawyer from Uncle Percival's firm. She looked again at the hunched man. Mr. Booker, this is Dr. Grant, local physician and family friend. Again the lawyer groaned.
I don't need a doctor.
Dr. Grant is an excellent physician. I'm sure he can help you. She turned to Teddy and saw his shoulders straighten and chest expand at her words of praise.
Indeed, I will endeavor to ease your discomfort if I can.
It will pass, the lawyer insisted. He stood, faltered, and teetered again. Teddy took his arm.
Come, Mr. Booker, you will feel better once you lie down.
Isabel hesitated. Oh, yes, of course, she said. One of the guest rooms upstairs. Mr. Booker shook his head. I planned to take a room at the inn. No need, she said, unless... Can you manage more stairs, do you think? If not, perhaps our footman can help you carry...
I can manage,
Mr. Booker gritted out between clenched teeth, his face damp and pale. While Dr. Grant took one arm, she took his other, and together they helped the lawyer inside. For some reason she quailed at the thought of inviting this man into her home, but charity and duty overrode her desire for self-preservation. Poor Mr. Booker. What an impression to make. Poor guy. Trying so hard.